Hi, I'm Tina Alexis Allen. This is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Tina Alexis Allen.
Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Troy is no longer himself. Kidnapped by aliens infected with the essence of the dead General Tomas, Troy grasps at his only hope of survival. He merges his soul with the alien parasite trying to possess him, leaving him forever changed, and not entirely for the worse. Once plagued by crippling phobias, Troy is now fearless, willing to fight his enemies with his bare hands. But with his new strength also comes a new weakness: women. Tomas was notorious for his insatiable desires, and Troy finds himself constantly resisting temptation, especially the gorgeous, manipulative Alta. Although Alta has convinced the Pyrrhans she's helping them prepare to battle the murderous Reptarans, she's actually meticulously planning to steal their ultimate power source and then abandon them to their fate. Alta won't hesitate to kill anyone in her way, and her deep love for Tomas is Troy's only advantage. He convinces Alta that Tomas has taken full control of his being and thus keeps her trust and his life. While Alta schemes, Troy covertly struggles to save the Pyrrhans and prevent the Reptarans from invading Earth. But first he must wrest back control of his own soul. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Find it on Amazon today. There's a link in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Tina Alexis Allen on the show. She has a brand new book out called Hiding Out, a memoir of drugs, deception, and double lives. And this story is mind-blowing. I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Tina. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about the book and all other things to do with you and writing and the show. And yes, just happy to be talking from New York to Mississippi, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Wow. I actually was an athlete, so writing wasn't really something that I was thinking about till much, much later in life. But funny you should ask, I came across something I wrote, I think it was from my senior year, English class or something, and it was a creative writing assignment. And I was going through some boxes recently with one of my 7 sisters, and I pulled it out. I just remember the first line of it and how exciting it was to read it. Like, I remember the excitement of writing it, like there was an expression, But remember the first line was something like, as I look back on my 7 years, as if that were like a whole lifetime. And then I went on to write whatever. But I think, I remember in picking that up recently that I remember the excitement of expressing something. I had never done that up on the basketball court.
Wow. So you were a basketball player. What did you decide to pursue career-wise when you got out of school?
Well, I had an early dream that maybe I'd be a professional basketball player, even though at that time, the leagues were a little shaky. There wasn't the WNBA yet, but just on the brink of different professional leagues. But once I realized that wasn't really happening as a viable career, when I was on a scholarship in college, I kind of got that my freshman year. I actually went on to get an MBA and went into the business side of fashion. So I had done a thesis in fashion marketing with the decision that I wanted to go to New York and get into the rag business, but on the business side of it. So very creative, but still, more of a business thing. So that's what I did first before I became an actor. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about acting for just a minute. You're an actor and a
Yes.
playwright. What got you interested in the arts?
I was in New York, and I didn't grow up in a family. I mean, there was definitely music in the house, a love of musicals and things like that. But no one in my family had taken a creative path. So coming to New York was a real eye-opener for me. I'm from Maryland, from Chevy Chase. And coming to New York, started to see Broadway shows. I mean, I'd seen a few when I was a kid. My parents would take me up to New York or once to London. So I started seeing theater, but I also started seeing different kind of theater, Eric Bogosian and, Sandra Bernhardt. And I was very interested in solo expression. I happened to see, for some reason, I had a friend who was really into solo. I ended up seeing sort of that edgy fringe theater solo thing that was happening like in the early 90s. And interesting, that's a path I took. I had 2 solo shows. In fact, the last one that led to the book. But I think New York, I mean, that's the short answer on all of the creative juices. And the fashion industry, I worked for an incredibly creative designer who was really ahead of his time. That was my first job, and it was just a plethora of creative voices and expression at that company. So, yeah.
Do you feel that there's a connection, Tina, between fashion and acting and writing? Can you see a progression there of storytelling in a sense that takes on all these different shapes, but in essence are communicating something emotional to the person on the other side?
Absolutely. And as I said, the designer I worked for, initially his name was Willie Smith. He was one of the first sort of designers that was sort of designing from the street, if you know what I mean. He got influence from the street. And he, I remember the fashion shows that he would put on were not your ordinary, walk down the runway. I remember he hired the Senegalese ballet. He went to Senegal and then he brought them here and they were part of the fashion show and he did a video. I mean, this is way before, MTV and, well, not before MTV, but certainly before fashion sort of became what it is today. So yeah, that was storytelling. And then acting was, of course, a more personal expression for me, which also was physical, which I love because I am an athlete. And then just the natural progression to, hey, I want to work more as an actor. I don't want to sit around and wait for the phone to ring. And I got it that I should start writing things for myself. And that sort of led organically to the solo show. And then, of course, now to Hiding Out. And I also am a screenwriter. Just finished writing a screenplay with a wonderful director. So, yeah, it does feel like a natural progression.
When you made the transition to acting, do you remember what that first feeling was like when you put on a show in front of an audience and it? Because I've done some theater as well, small theater, but there's something that happens when it goes from the academic side, where you're rehearsing and working with other actors, and then you put it on in front of an audience and something completely different happens. It goes from an academic exercise almost to something magical. It's so bizarre. Do you remember that first feeling that you had?
I do. I remember both the terror.
Yes.
I remember my mother was in the audience. I remember a lot of things. I remember shaking, and I remember the absolute joy of having a full expression from the inside publicly. And even though you are in your own world, there is something about the fact that you never do forget that you're sharing. The greatest advice or piece of wisdom I ever got, I think, from an acting coach is that she said, acting is giving. And I think when you approach it that way, and particularly when you're on the stage, that understanding that there are people there, but your job is to give of yourself, give through character, be generous. You know, it's not about you. You're actually bringing some life to the stage, and you're also there to share it and move it out. And I think that electricity, when you're in community, is probably the most satisfying thing.
Yeah, for sure. So how many plays have you done?
Oh gosh, I would just have to take a stab at it unless I pull up my IMDb page. I guess I've probably done, I don't know, 10, 15 plays, you know.
Wow.
2 of them were mine that I wrote, my solo shows. But yeah, probably in that territory. Yeah.
How did you make the transition to writing your own plays?
Well, like I said, I really, I think being a business person first and also an athlete, there was very much a sense of work and reward, work and reward, work and reward, in the sense of you work and then something follows. As an actor, for reasons we all probably know or have read about, it's challenging. You can work and work and work and work, and you hear of people, you know, they're overnight successes, but they've been actually training for 20 years. And then they have, you know, now they're on television, so everyone thinks they're famous, and now they've, you know, but the fact is, acting doesn't work like that. So I think initially I thought it was going to happen the way everything else happened. You know, I work hard as an actor, and then I'll start working. And when it didn't happen as consistently and the trajectory that I wanted, that's what had me start writing. Because I was like, I'm going to make my own movie. Well, I'll just write my own solo show. Do you know what I mean? I'll create this and I'll act in it. So that's really how it started. And I enjoyed it. But
right.
It was a means to an end, frankly.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were an athlete also. Do you draw a connection between being an athlete and being an artist, a performance artist, and a writer? I think a lot of people would think of those two things as being, complete polar opposites. But can you draw a connection between those two things?
Absolutely. If someone said to me, you know, you get to pick, you know, what you were doing before, or you couldn't be training as an actor as a kid, as a young adult. You had to be doing something else. But you're going to be an actor. What would you choose to get ready? And I would be an athlete. I would choose exactly that route. And the reason is because, you know, it's funny, the Olympics are on right now, and you watch, and when you really think about the level of concentration, they are doing it often, you know, obviously in the Olympics, they're doing it live. You know, it's like being out on a stage and someone says go and you have to perform. And when they say action, you go, or when they say curtain, you go. And you've done all this training and then you have to get out of the way. And I think there's such a parallel. And also I feel like the discipline has really helped me a lot. I mean, that's one thing I can say about my career and about my work ethic really comes out of being an athlete and knowing what it is to train, and that you just keep doing it. You just keep doing it. Even if you lose, you're going to show up for the next game. And there's a lot of losing as an actor because, you know, you get a lot of rejection. You know, you don't get most of the jobs. You know, that's just the reality of the numbers.
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping you would touch on that, because sports really teaches you how to deal with a lot of defeat.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a good lesson for life. You know, to be a good sport goes a long way.
It does, and to cheer people on and to up on a set and realize many, and that, you know, everyone, you know, you're a team. I just finished 2 seasons on Outsiders, and I was part of a clan. I mean, that was essentially the storyline. I was part of a large family headed by David Morse, a great actor. He was our clan leader, and I was part of the family. And that is an exact example of what it is, be on a basketball court and everyone has a role and no one's more important or less important, but bring it. And that's the way acting should be, always.
So we've got a great picture so far of kind of your career path and all of your accomplishments. But this new book that you've written is really a
You want to go into the madness now, don't you?
Yeah, I really want to, because I think there's this great contrast between Tina, the driven, successful, actress, playwright, athlete, all of this stuff. But this book, Hiding Out, tell us a little bit about kind of set this, where this, well, first off, before we get into what the book is, why did you decide to write this memoir?
Well, as you said, there is a dichotomy a big dichotomy between who I am today and the troubled gal that is the narrator, me, in my young adulthood. And because I am on the other side of it, and because I am a firm believer in paying things forward, I really felt that I was fortunate enough to be in a place at this point in my life where I'm not of it, and that I grew past. And yet I do feel a sense of responsibility and a desire to lay out in a way what it was and be able to talk with you and others and discuss how, you don't have to end up where you started, and that there's a path out no matter what it looks like and how bad it might have been or how bad it feels now, that there's a way out. And I think it's just a natural progression of me actually getting older and being where I am in my life that I felt, okay, now's the time. I can hold it in my hand. I can turn it every which way. It's not blowing me over or destroying me in any way. It's just something now that happened, and I'm okay. And now I want to talk to people about how they can be okay, perhaps, or the damage that secrets does to one's life and one's family. There are a lot of universal themes, which I'm sure we'll get into, but certainly secrets and transparency are two big ones.
So set up the book for us. From the time you pick it up, the cover image is, this picture of, I'm assuming you, lying on the floor, and it's this, kind of sepia tone photo. Maybe I didn't get that right, but, and there's a full color apple there. There's so much going on in this visual imagery, that you kind of, it kind of gives you an unsettling feeling before you even open the book. So how did you open the story, and where did you decide to start telling it?
Well, I narrate the book in the first person as beginning at 18. I was keeping a lot of secrets myself at that point in my life. I had a childhood that had me growing up at lightning speed, faster perhaps than one would want their child to be growing up at. But I was sort of operating out of that context of having grown up fast. I was acting out, I was keeping secrets, and at the same time I was on a full basketball scholarship at the University of Maryland, playing for them. So basically that's where I open up in terms of me. And then at that point I didn't really like my father growing up. Frankly, wasn't always so nice, particularly to my mother, and for reasons I didn't know but came to learn. So in setting it up, I basically wasn't, in any way in a relationship of any kind with my dad. I didn't really, as I say, like him very much, so I rather avoided him. And what happens quickly, which I think is on the jacket cover, so I won't give it away. But what happens very quickly is my father discovers that I'm actually in a relationship with a woman, and she was much older than I was, and I was 18 and she was 30, and my father picked up on it, and I'd been hiding inside of my family and, elsewhere. I had been with, I dated guys, dated girls, but at this point in my life, I was with her. My dad picked up on it and then proceeded to take us to dinner and basically confessed that he himself was, quote, gay or had buried his lover in the war. Now, my father, just to give this some context, is the holiest man you've ever met.
That's what I was going to ask you to put this in context of the rest of the story.
So the bigger context is my father, who's deceased. Literally, if you met him, you'd say that's one of the holiest I've ever met. And what I mean by that is he was authentically devoted as a Catholic to the church. Mass every day. We said rosary after dinner every night. I mean, my house was, the quintessential devout Catholic household with 13 kids and a mother and father. And I'm the youngest. So it was a crazy, and that's sort of how the book opens in the first few chapters with the setting up of my secrets and then that quick reveal from him. And then we go on to this, crazy, wild roller coaster of keeping secrets from mom, from the family, traveling together, clubbing, just a very complicated ride, and my own shenanigans and acting out, in my own way. And so that's that. I think that sets up.
Yeah. Well, as someone who you didn't have a much of a relationship at all with your father, and then when you're a young adult, he makes this earth-shattering revelation to you in light of how you thought, or what who you thought he was.
Absolutely.
What did that do for your understanding of him? Did your relationship with him did it? Let's see. I'm trying to think of how I want to ask this. Did that open a window to understand the way he was, or did that just bring up more questions?
Well, initially I was really spinning. I mean, it was a shocking revelation, and it wasn't even one of those revelations that you sometimes have when you hear it and you go, "Oh, that makes sense. Now it all makes perfect sense." It actually didn't, because there weren't things that I had seen or experienced that I went, "Oh, okay, now that fits in a box that I was confused about." But what it did is, look, I wouldn't condone any parent sharing a kind of secret like that with a young adult, and with the understanding that they're going to keep it from the other parent and a big family, especially when, frankly, it really did go against the grain of everything that he was saying and the church says. And I don't mean about his sexuality, I mean about honesty, I mean about transparency. And yet, he was of a time where that wasn't a choice. So a man devoted to the church in the time that my father was living, becoming a man himself, becoming a father. I mean, even before that, he wasn't living in a time where that was a choice. Whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, people today can generally make that decision if they want to. So I have enormous compassion, and I don't judge him in any way for those things. I have complete love and forgiveness for my father for anything that he did, and I understand his struggle. But I think at that time, still at 18, I was confused. But what it did do is it gave me a dad, to answer your question, really. It gave me a father that I never had, and that felt good. It felt good even though it was ridiculously complicated. It actually felt good to go, I'm seen by my father for what felt like the first time. And he gave me some space to be who I was, and I don't want to leave that out, because that too was a gift, that he wasn't judging me.
I'm assuming that because growing up very devoutly Catholic, like you did, I'm assuming that you were probably terrified of him finding out, about your sexuality and what you, the relationship that you were in. What did that, I can't imagine that conversation when he drops that on you. I would think that you probably go from terrified to what? Kind of in an instant.
I hope, in reading the book, it's a really, some of it's on the jacket cover, as I said, but the scene and that chapter, it's quite powerful, and it also then jumps from the dinner where that happens, just with the three of us, my girlfriend, myself, my father, at a very fancy place where he belonged. He was a member, and then the next morning when it's just me and my mother, because I was the last one home. Everyone had pretty much moved out, so it was really kind of this triangle, which is a lot of what the book is, and managing that. And I adored my mother, so yes, it was very complicated, shocking, and then that scene too with my mother the next morning, another sense of like you really get what I was feeling, which is how do I manage this? And I adore her, and I don't want to be lying to her, and I also can't tell her because that felt just as scary as telling my dad or my dad ever knowing. So it wasn't like all of a sudden I felt I was going to have a conversation with anyone about this. It was just how do I manage this internally? And that's a lot of what the story is too, is just making sense of this complicated, bittersweet father-daughter relationship and all my, my own just coming of age.
Right. What did that do for the relationship with you and your girlfriend? That's a heavy thing for someone to drop, not only on you, but and she was included. What did that do for that dynamic?
Well, I think, as I recall, it's a lot of years ago, but I think that the only thing I would say is that I probably felt embarrassed. I think that's valid, a valid memory, that initially feeling like, like too much information, like now she's been brought into it, and good thing in this context is she was 30, so she was 18 with me. She had her own version of that looked like with the years under belt. But I remember that, and then the flip side of that is there was someone to at least talk to a little bit about it, but I think I did have some shame and maybe some embarrassment, and maybe like, you know how it is, like any young adult feels around their parent, no matter what the service is. Sometimes like when you're with your partner or whatever, it's like, oh, dad or mom, don't do that, or don't say that, or don't, but now it's like times 100. Like, is he really getting on the dance floor dancing like that? Like, the three of us have to dance, we're at this club, like craziness like that. So it was complicated. Yeah.
So
to say the least.
So this occurrence, this meeting with your dad and you and your girlfriend, I'm assuming just kind of blew your world open. And how did things start going sideways?
Well, I think, because the book travels a few years. So this went on for years. New girlfriend, breakups, wild parties, obviously drugs, a lot of alcohol. That internal spinning that I was doing as a result of my childhood, and this on top of it, had me getting to a kind of a breaking point too. And I think ultimately for me, what was going on is that I just don't think I could handle carrying any more adults. And like I say that in the prologue, that adults have asked me to keep their secrets since before I was 10. And I think I hit a wall and started to just feel like a little bit of a breaking point. So I don't want to give away too many things in the book, but I would say that definitely, at that young age, it was a lot of pressure, and my own behavior was causing a lot of the spinning out too that ultimately happened.
At what point do you start getting to the other side of what's going on with you and having the ability to kind of realize the spiral that you'd gone on, and how did you start coming out of that?
Well, do you mean inside of the book, or just in the trajectory of my life?
Just in the trajectory of your life. I don't want you to give away too much of the book, but
look.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the as I said, in the book, definitely the eyes do open a bit, but in the journey of my life, my healing, I think the answer to that is that where my healing really started was probably like opening up more and more honestly to a bigger breaking point, kind of in my mid-20s. But I think the thing that really sort of, put gasoline on it was becoming an actor. And I think that even though it wasn't a conscious decision, that somehow the acting and the healing and the expressing were connected. In hindsight, they certainly were. And it was the obvious place, from a spiritual and divine point of view, that I would go to when I look back on it. Because, when I started my younger years, I was working on the physical, if you will, in the sense of I was an athlete. So a lot of attention was to performance and body and, selling in that way. Then it shifted into business and an MBA. And so, put more food and like that. And by, my late 20s, the decision to leave that career and become an actor, I think had everything to do with the fact that what I needed was to start inside. That a lot of scars, a lot of damage identity, and looked at and given some deep.
Yeah. I can definitely see where kind of helps to put a point on things and to really work through emotions and be playing a role. I never know where the real work is coming from. You as the actor. Now you start to write memoir and give it a one slate based on this story as well. That gets to putting a very fine point on it, because you're actually having to tell the actual story and not just masquerade the story in whatever play you're putting on, so to speak. How do you decide to tell this story? And I think one thing that a lot of people would love to hear is, because you do come from such a big family. You said 13 kids, very Catholic family. Yeah. I would imagine there are a lot of feelings around regarding the story. How do you decide to tell it, and what was your interaction like, maybe with your siblings or other people that might have some connection to this story?
Yeah, basically my first solo show, I think, sprung out of mother's passing. I think that it was a way for me to process a lot of that and tell the story that for me needed to be told. That was, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, basically all on the East Coast, so there were only a few that saw that. I had a few sisters who flew out to see it. They were very supportive, very loving. As my career has moved on, I came back to New York. I did a solo show years ago playing my father. So that solo show then organically became Hiding Out. That show I actually love exclusively, so I should call it a one-man show in this case. And it was an enormously satisfying experience to find even deeper love, understanding, and forgiveness of him, even though I had forgiven him before he passed. And this show happened after he passed. That said, now we were getting into A, closer home, because I'm in New York, B, Facebook and social media is now part of the world, so things are even more public. And the fact is, my father's sexuality with some in the family was something I think that they would prefer not be public. For me, I'm not saying that they have shame or they don't have shame. All I know is that I don't have shame about it. And so from where I stand, there's so many teaching moments, so many teaching opportunities to tell his story, which is fascinating. I mean, he was a really good man. He gave so much to people outside of my family. particularly. He had a pilgrimage for the sick and handicapped for 50 years that he, was on in Life magazine for back in the 50s. I mean, there's just a lot of good and service he did. And then I think that there's so many teaching moments in terms of his commitment to the church and how faith and sexuality merge. So for me, that's where I have always been coming from is, how does telling the truth, because that's what I'm committed to in my life, is how does telling the truth serve as opposed to grits, which is what I grew up with. That's my commitment. And yet, again, some of my siblings who would prefer that things stay in the family or remain a secret or, not be public. And I understand that and I accept that, but I also can't take their journey. I have to take mine. And I've changed all the names in the book and done what I can to keep as much, anonymity for them as possible and yet still be true to myself, which that's what we're here to do. Move ourselves forward first and serve. And this is my version of what I think my legacy hopefully will be, is a truth teller.
Tina, what do you hope people take out of this story, this real story of you and your family? Obviously, there are salacious details that are that we love to kind of ooh and ah at.
Of course,
the
train wreck at times.
So there's obviously people will be intrigued. We love to see. I think we love to see the things that we like to hide about ourselves coming out in daylight in other folks. I think that's the real titillating thing about it. But ultimately, what is the story, the truth that you want people to take away from your story?
I think at the core that when we keep secrets, it prevents intimacy. And I think that in families particularly, there is, I think, is probably going back a really long time, particularly in American culture, but that, families have a culture. Every family has a culture. The culture that I grew up in was a culture of secrecy, but I think that's universal to a lot of families. I think there are a lot of families that are carrying some sort of secret. And I think what I hope for is that people will look at my story, and yes, they're going to be, grabbed by all those salacious details, as you said, because there are a lot of them. But I tell them because I think shame is the thing that keeps people stuck more than anything. I think shame about either who they are, who their family is, who their mother is, their father, something they did, something that was done to them in many cases, and they don't talk about it. They sit up and put it under a carpet, or I don't mean everyone has to write a book. I hope this book gives to own their story in whatever form they want to and importantly need to be free. Because in the end, that's really the point at all. People just don't need to be walking around feeling ashamed. And so that's part of the reason I did give this book the detail I gave, not to be salacious or titillating, but because, God is in the details. And I think we own those details. We aren't of them anymore. They become facts. What happened in this are facts for me. Yes, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have, I wasn't a human being that could get triggered and all those things. But in general, I'm very capable of talking about this. And I think when people are placed in their lives, when they can just talk what happened, is freedom. And sometimes some word, I think the first step is not keeping secrets.
I think that's a great lesson to take away from this. Tina, the book is, when this show airs, the book will be out everywhere. We're gonna send everybody to pick up a copy of it. I think people are going to be really, really fascinated by this story, and I think it's going to connect with a lot of people on a very deep level. What else is going on with you these days? The book is out now. That's done. That's a huge weight, off your shoulders when that's finally done. What are you doing now?
Yes. Well, now that I have a little more time, I'm back out auditioning again. In fact, I have an audition for a television pilot today, so I'm excited about that. But yeah, just sort of putting some more attention on my actress because she's had to take a back seat for a while I was dealing with this. And so, yes, and I have there's a screenplay that someone has written for me, and I probably will produce it as well as co-star in it. So that's in development. And then I'm writing too. I just finished a screenplay with a wonderful director named Gabby Dalal, who did a recent movie with Elle Fanning called 3 Generations. And she and I just co-wrote a screenplay called Park Avenue. And we hope to get that made in the coming year. So that'll be exciting. So yeah, I mean, just acting, writing. And I also have a nonprofit driven jewelry brand that I co-founded called Gina Raffaella Jewelry, and we give partial proceeds to nonprofits that support peace. So we take bullets and we transform them into beautiful pieces of jewelry, sending the message of peace and nonviolence.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like it. Tina, are you on social media where people could follow you and kind of get plugged into what you're doing?
Yeah, I'd love people to follow. I love to stay in touch. I'm on all the platforms. I mean, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my handle is at Tina Alexis Allen, Allen. And I would love to stay in touch and communicate. I always do with people who follow me.
Excellent. Tina, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of the new book, Hiding Out, a Memoir of Drugs, Deception, and Double Lives. It was so good to talk to you, Tina. Thanks for coming on.
So good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time, Hank.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Behold! The shout broke the Sabbath stillness of the forest. A squirrel paused on the side of an oak, attentive, its tail curling like a question mark. Below its perch, a young man with auburn hair straddled the ruts of the aqueduct trail and raised his arms as if to part the Red Sea. Behold, good people of Sleepy Hollow! I bring you proof, incontrovertible proof, he gestured to the lumpy pile of horse shit at his feet, that the headless horseman doth truly exist. The squirrel shook its head. It turned tail and disappeared into the sway of branches, leaving Jason alone with his work. Jason knelt and fished a trash bag from the back pocket of his jeans. His hands moved quickly, mechanically. He inverted the bag and covered the chunks, trying to gather them all at once, but half went rolling and he had to corral them with a twig. He knotted the bag, jumped to his feet, and pressed his nose to his elbow. Ugh, why does horse shit smell so bad? It started off as grass. How can mere grass go so terribly wrong? He checked his work gloves. Both were clean. Good. He hated to have his hands exposed. His gift had become so damn sensitive ever since Halloween. And what psychic visions might a man get from touching horse shit? Better not to know. He waved the air, gathered his gear, and walked on. He swung the bag of manure as he walked, stopping now and then to spear a fast food wrapper or the shed skin of a drinking straw. Naked branches crossed overhead, stripped of all but the most determined, doomed leaves. Underfoot, the October carpet of orange and rust had faded into the browns and squalid yellows of late November. Jason himself was the most colorful thing in the woods. The Department of Sanitation had issued him a bib of fluorescent Gatorade orange, standard uniform for a juvenile offender. The bib read, "Community Payback," across the shoulders. The words felt like an open invitation for the townsfolk to pelt him with rotted fruit. He carried a pole for stabbing and a bag for stuffing. He used the pole as a walking stick mostly, ambling along like an exile in the wilderness. Westchester County had tasted its first sugar spoon of snow that morning, a flurry of dandelion seeds that had bumbled to earth to wink and vanish without taking root, autumn's eviction notice. Jason didn't mind the cold. He'd been raised in Maine, after all, where even in mid-October he might awaken to find the silver Mercedes crackling with frost. From this elevation he could see the entire town. The horn of the Metro-North Railroad sounded in the distance, a long, mournful note followed by 2 short hiccups. Jason stopped to lean on his staff and rotate his sprained ankle. He looked down the hill, but couldn't see the broken bridge, Ichabod's Bridge. Too many trees were in the way, too many locust and birch suckling at the sides of the Pocantico. He shivered. He'd never gone back to that place. He'd been too afraid. He walked on. A chain-link fence appeared, surrounding a field of headstones. This was the newer area of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, more modern, more orderly, with room for several hundred souls, though it was only a fragment of the vast graveyard on the other side of the river. A familiar figure appeared among the graves. Joey raised a hand in greeting. "Nice outfit," he called. "Who says straight boys can't dress?" "Ha ha," Jason yelled. "Get in before dark." He waved and walked on.